Wealth Attraction Research, Wages of Labor 2, Part 2. Wealth Attraction Research, Wages of Labor, Part 2. You're listening to Wealth Attraction Research, WAR, Wages of Labor, Part 2, presented by Hakeem Ali Bokus Alexander on Spreaker Social Podcast and Wisdom Social Audio Inc., presented for World Reading Club in association with ExercisingYourMind.com and UniquilibriuM. This edition's reading focus comes to us from continuing the Chapter 8 of Wealth of Nations call of the Wages of Labor. In the previous one, I thought that I would be able to get through it and read also the Little Book of Economics as well as How Money Works, but I did not. It's a longer chapter than I thought, but I'm going to finish it off now, moving back to a little bit of where I left off before, and then continuing through the end of this, and then get to, of course, the Little Book of Economics, as well as How Money Works. So I recall leaving off with some commentary here about slaves, and some very interesting stuff that Adam Smith had to say about slaves. So if you didn't hear part one about this, of this reading, you can go back and listen to that. This is a continuation of that, and I have 8 more pages here to go, 8 more overstuffed pages of information, but I'll get through it. And then on to, as I said, the Little Book of Economics and How Money Works. So this presentation and reading is named in part by Chapter 8 of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations from 1776, Wages of Labor. It is actually called Of the Wages of Labor, and gives some very insightful details about the workings of money as being paid to people who work for it, and as well as a lot of other interesting things about history and his observations from that time. It's a fascinating read, and let's continue here, where he talks about the wear and tear of a slave. All right. Well, hello, Miss Cecilia Grace. How do you do? Welcome. All right. The wear and tear of a slave, it has been said, is at the expense of his master, but that of a free servant is at his own expense. I find that hilarious that you would use the word free and servant the same, like one right after a free servant. Isn't that one of those oxymoronic, juxtaposed, adjectives? That is pretty funny. All right, once again, I told you, my sense of humor is dry and questionable. There are things that I will laugh about here and comment on that you may not understand where it's coming from, but that's okay. Take it as it is. It's pure information. The wear and tear of a slave, it has been said, is at the expense of his master, but that of a free servant is at his own expense. The wear and tear of the latter, the slave, however, the wear and tear of the latter, however, is in reality as much at the expense of his master as that of the former. The wages paid to journeymen and servants of every kind must be such as may enable them, one with another, to continue the race of journeymen and servants according as the increasing, diminishing, or stationary demand of the society may happen to require. But though the wear and tear of a free servant be equally at the expense of his master, it generally costs him much less than that of a slave. The fund destined for replacing or repairing, if I may say so, the wear and tear of a slave is commonly managed by a negligent master or careless overseer. that destined for performing the same office with regard to the free man is managed by the free man himself. So that's what I mean by the fact that it costs more to maintain a slave than it does a free man, because the master of the slave has to do that through the overseer, right? It's managed by a negligent master or careless overseer. So of course there's expense in that. All right. Well, that makes sense in a purely transactional sense. The disorders which generally prevail in the economy of the rich naturally introduce themselves into the management of the former. The strict frugality and parsimonious attention of the poor as naturally establish themselves in that of the latter. The strict frugality and parsimonious attention of the poor as naturally establish themselves in that of the latter. Under such different management, the same purpose must require very different degrees of expense to execute it. It appears, accordingly, from the experience of all ages and nations, I believe, that the work done by freemen comes cheaper in the end than that performed by slaves. It is found to do so even at Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. The wages of common labor are so very high. It's found to do so even at Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, where the wages of common labor are so very high. So to maintain slaves, you have to employ a managing master and or a managing overseer, and also provide housing for them, right? And and clothing for them, and feed the slaves, and and provide for the chaining them up and the whipping them, and of course you have to supply the whips and all that stuff too, right? So there's all that extra expense in having slaves, y'all. So just in case if any of you are wanting to employ, to use that term loosely, the work of slaves, just know that it's going to cost you more than the freeman that has to provide for all those things, except for, whips and chains, unless he's, of that sort for himself. So, it is even found to do so even at Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, where the wages of common labor are so very high. The liberal reward of labor, therefore, as an effect of increasing wealth, so it is the cause of increasing population. To complain of it is to lament over the necessary effect and cause of the greatest public prosperity. The cause of public prosperity? So increasing wealth is the cause of increasing population. So the reward of labor, as it is to the effect of increasing wealth, so it is the cause of increasing population. To complain of it is to lament over the necessary effect and cause of the greatest public prosperity. It deserves to be remarked, perhaps, that it is in the progressive state, while the society is advancing to the further acquisition, rather than when it has acquired its full complement of riches, that the condition of the laboring poor, of the great body of the people, seems to be the happiest and most comfortable. Okay, so in the progressive state, while the society is advancing to the further acquisition, rather than when it has acquired its full complement of riches, that the condition of the laboring poor, of the great body of the people, seems to be the happiest and most comfortable. Well, this matches up with what he said earlier about that when a place is stagnant or stationary, that people get paid usually less than when a place is advancing, even when the place that might be stationary in its riches, the wealth of a nation, as in the example he gave earlier of England, even though it was richer at the time than the United States, since it was leveled out, so the people's pay was less. And even though the United States was much poorer, the colonies, since they were increasing at a rapid rate, people there were paid more. And this also is interesting in what I read before in some of the supplementary and adjunct material, and what some might regard as a conspiracy theory in Babylon's Banksters about the cycles. Anyway, continuing. So he says that so I'll read that again. It deserves to be remarked, perhaps, that it is in the progressive state, while the society is advancing to the further acquisition, rather than when it has acquired its full complement of riches, that the condition of the laboring poor, of the great body of the people, seems to be the happiest and the most comfortable. Okay, that makes sense, though, right? Because the laboring poor are the ones who are making the rich richer. So of course, there's going to be more jobs for them, and maybe increases in pay for the laboring poor, because that's what's making the rich richer. It's like, employ them as much as we can to make the rich richer. Let's make ourselves richer by employing more laborers and maybe even giving them more money so they can continue to use our wealth. Right, and while that's happening, they seem to be happiest and most comfortable. It is hard in the stationary and miserable in the declining state. The progressive state is, in reality, the cheerful and the hardy state to all the different orders of the society. The stationary is dull, the declining, melancholy. Right, because in stationary, that's when people are homeless, but when it's declining, that's when people are starving to death. The liberal reward of labor, as it encourages the propagation, meaning people making families, making babies. The liberal reward of labor, as it encourages the propagation, so it increases the industry of the common people. The wages of labor are the encouragement of industry, which, like every other human quality, improves in proportion to the encouragement it receives. A plentiful subsistence increases the bodily strength of the laborer, and the comfortable hope of bettering his condition and of ending his days perhaps in ease and plenty animates him to exert that strength to the utmost. Wow. Give them more money so they can eat better, so they can work harder. Oh my gosh, this is incredible. I just love the way that it's worded, though, right? It's you gotta love it. Okay, right. So a plentiful subsistence increases the bodily strength of the laborer, and the comfortable of bettering his condition. So he gets all like, I can do more, I can do better because I feel good, I'm stronger, right? Right? So he has the comfortable hope of bettering his condition and the ending his days perhaps in ease and plenty, right? So he can go home and relax with the beer and a full belly, right? And that animates him to exert that strength most, because he's all so fucking bullshit. Where wages are high, accordingly, we shall always find the workmen more active, diligent, and expeditious than where they are low. In England, for example, than in Scotland, in the neighborhood of great towns than in remote country places. Right? I mean, this is just commentary on, even though this was 1776, this is exactly how people are living now. Right? If people are better, they have enough to eat, they can work better, stronger. I mean, barring like really negative and bad emotions about which most people feel, who I've heard over and over again, who hate and complain about their jobs and stuff like that. Right? That's of course, they work harder, they feel better, and they're just making somebody else richer. All right. Some workmen, indeed, when they can earn in 4 days what will maintain them through the week, will be idle in the other 3. This, however, is by no means the case with the greater part. Workmen, on the contrary, when they are liberally paid by the piece, are very apt to overwork themselves, and to ruin their health and constitution in a few years. A carpenter in London and in some other places is not supposed to last in his utmost vigor above 8 years. Something of the same kind happens in many other trades, in which the workmen are paid by the piece, as they generally are in manufactures, and even in country labor, wherever wages are higher than ordinary. Almost every class of artificers is subject to peculiar infirmity occasioned by excessive application to their peculiar species of work. Ramuzzini, an eminent Italian physician, has written a particular book concerning such disease. We do not reckon our soldiers the most industrious set of people among us. Yet when soldiers have been employed in some particular sorts of work, and liberally paid by the piece, their offices have frequently been obliged to stipulate them with the undertaker, that they should not be allowed to earn above a certain sum every day, according to the rate at which they were paid. Till this stipulation was made, mutual emulation and the desire of greater gain frequently prompted them to overwork themselves and to hurt their health by excessive labor. Wow, they even knew it back then, right? Working people like slaves, even though they be free, right? They can work themselves into sickness, death. Continuing, excessive application during 4 days of the week is frequently the real cause of the idleness of the other 3, so much so loudly complained of. Great labor, either of mind or body, continued for several days together, is in most men naturally followed by a great desire of relaxation, which, if not restrained by force or by some strong necessity, is almost irresistible. Waiting for the weekends, waiting for the holidays, wishing to go on vacation. It is the call of nature, which requires to be relieved by some indulgence, sometimes of ease only, but sometimes too of dissipation and diversion. If it is not complied with, the consequences are often dangerous and sometimes fatal, and such as almost always, sooner or later, bring on peculiar infirmity of the trade. If masters would always listen to the dictates of reason and humanity, they have frequently occasion, rather than to moderate, than to animate the application. Wait a minute. If masters would always listen to the dictates of reason and humanity, they have frequently occasion, rather to moderate, than to animate the application of many of their workmen. Okay, good. So it says, if they would listen to the dictates of reason and humanity, if they would just not be assholes, they have frequently occasion, rather to moderate, right, to give people a day or two off, right, more than to animate or make them work harder, the application of many of their workmen. Got it. It will be found, I believe, in every sort of trade that the man who works so moderately as to be able to work constantly not only preserves his health the longest, but in the course of the year executes the greatest quantity of work. So it's funny that some people act like this is something new then, right? That working people the way that they do, right, is detrimental to their health and may even kill them with all the stress and worry and anxiety and all this other stuff like that. So not only working people so hard, but paying them very little. This combination of stuff is demise. It will be found, I believe, in every sort of the trade that the man who works so moderately as to be able to work constantly not only preserves his health the longest, but in the course of the year executes the greatest quantity of work. So you can work better and more efficiently when you have more leisure time to relax? Wow, what a concept. And this is not even a criticism in a negative light of the work of Adam Smith. He's just describing what he's seen. This is from his long years of research, his observations. He's pretty much very neutral in this, even the way he talks about slaves and other things. This is a pretty straightforward piece of work. Continuing, in cheap years, it is pretended, workmen are generally more idle, and in dear ones, more industrious than ordinary. A plentiful subsistence, therefore, it has been concluded, relaxes, and a scanty one quickens their industry. Well, yeah, right? So if you have more than enough or more than you need, then you'll be chilling, right? But if you need more, then usually people push it and push more and harder to work more to get more, right? So, a plentiful subsistence, therefore, it has been concluded, relaxes, and a scanty one quickens their industry. That a little more plenty than ordinary may render some workmen idle cannot well be doubted, but that it should have this effect upon the greater part, or that men in general should work better when they are ill-fed than when they are well-fed, when they are disheartened than when they are in good spirits, when they are frequently sick than when they are generally in good health, seems not very probable. Years of dearth, it is to be observed, are generally among the common people years of sickness and mortality, which cannot fail to diminish the produce of their industry. In years of plenty, servants frequently leave their masters and trust their subsistence to what they can make by their own industry. But the same cheapness of provisions, by increasing the fund which is destined for the maintenance of servants, encourages masters, farmers especially, to employ a greater number. Farmers, upon such occasions, expect more profit from their corn by maintaining a few more laboring servants than by selling it at a low price in the market. The demand for servants increases, while the number of those who offer to supply that demand diminishes. The price of labor, therefore, frequently rises in cheap years. In years of scarcity, the difficulty and uncertainty of subsistence make all such people eager to return to service. People get paid more in cheap years. And in years of scarcity, so when they don't have enough, the difficulty and uncertainty of subsistence make all such people eager to return to service. God, what a way to be able to control everybody. By controlling the supply and the supply. Making things more expensive to get. So that the dollar or any currency pays for less of something. So that people have to work more. Okay. But the high price of provisions, by diminishing the funds destined for the maintenance of servants, disposes masters rather to diminish than to increase the number of those they have. The high price of provisions, so the high price of food, clothing, shelter, diminishes the funds destined for the maintenance of servants, right? To pay them, right? They have to give more, disposes masters or causes them, right, rather to diminish, like fire or not hire, than to increase the number of those they have. So that's interesting. That you'd think that it would be better for laborers and workers to get more because they need more, right? So the price of everything is going up. And so if the prices of everything is going up, food, clothing, shelter goes up, right? Then people need to get more money. And so those who are already working, right, are being paid more. Well, that makes sense then now, because then why would they hire more people if they're paying the ones they already have more because it costs more for them to live? Then of course they would diminish or like fire or not hire anymore, because then that means they would have to pay more money. Okay. All right, disposes, good, right, so disposes masters rather to diminish than to increase the number of those they have. In dear years, too, poor independent workmen frequently consume the little stocks with which they had used to supply themselves with the materials of their work, and are obliged to become journeymen for subsistence. More people want employment than can easily get it. Many are willing to take it upon lower terms than ordinary, and the wages of both servants and journeymen frequently sink in dear years. Wow. Remember, dear is a word for things costing more or things being more expensive. Another way to manipulate giving people less for the same amount of work, by making jobs less available, then people will be willing to work to get those jobs at a lower rate. Continuing, masters of all sorts therefore frequently make better bargains with their servants in dear years than in cheap years, and find them more humble and dependent in the former than in the latter. They naturally therefore commend the former as more favorable to industry. Landlords and farmers, besides, two of the largest classes of masters, have another reason for being pleased with dear years. The rents of the one and the profits of the other depend very much upon the price of provisions. Nothing can be more absurd, however, than to imagine that men in general should work less when they work for themselves than when they work for other people. Nothing can be more absurd, however, than to imagine that men in general should work less when they work for themselves than when they work for other people. A poor independent workman will generally be more industrious than even a journeyman who works by the piece. I wonder if that's the same for me. As I work for myself, am I working more than when I work for other people? I better, well, damn should then. Why would I want to work more for somebody else than I work for myself? A poor workman will generally be more industrious than even a journeyman who works by the piece. Or works by the job, right? Like if you work to make a certain something. Yeah. The one enjoys the whole produce of his own industry. The other shares it with his master. Okay, so yeah, I enjoy the whole produce of my own. And somebody who works for somebody else, even as a journeyman, shares with the master, the employer. The one in his separate independent state is less liable to the temptations of bad company, which in large manufactories so frequently ruin the morals of the other. Hanging out with idiots at work make you ruins your morals. That's hilarious. All right. The one in his separate, independent state is less liable to the temptations of bad company, which in large manufactories so frequently ruin the morals of the other. The superiority of the independent workman over those servants who are hired by the month or by the year and whose wages and maintenance are the same whether they do much or do little is likely to be still greater. Cheap years tend to increase the proportion of independent workmen to journeymen and servants of all kinds, and dear years to diminish it. A French author of great knowledge and ingenuity, Mr. Messance, receiver of the tallies in the election, I'll just say tallies, receiver of the tallies in the election of Saint Etienne, endeavors to show that the poor do more work in cheap than in dear years by comparing the quantity and value of the goods made upon those different occasions in 3 different manufactures. One of coarse woolens carried on at the elbow, one of linen, and another of silk, both which extend through the whole generality of Rouen. It appears from this account, which is occupied from the registers of the public offices, that the quantity and value of the goods made in all those 3 manufactures has generally been greater in cheap than in dear years, and that it has always been greatest in the cheapest and least in the dearest years. All the 3 seem to be stationary manufactures, or which, though their produce may vary somewhat from year to year, are upon the whole neither going backwards nor forwards. The manufacture of linen in Scotland, and that of coarse woolens in the West Riding of Yorkshire, or Yorkshire, are growing manufactures, of which the produce is generally, though with some variations, increasing both in quantity and value. Upon examining, however, the accounts which have been published of their annual produce, I have not been able to observe that its variations have had any sensible connection with the dearness or cheapness of the seasons. In 1740, a year of great scarcity, both manufactures, indeed, appear to have declined very considerably. But in 1756, another year of great scarcity, the Scotch manufacture made more than ordinary advances. The Yorkshire manufacture indeed declined, and its produce did not rise to what it had been in 1755 till 1766, after the repeal of the American Stamp Act. In that and the following year, it greatly exceeded what it had ever been before, and it has continued to advance ever since. What was the American Stamp Act? Does anybody know? I don't know. I don't recall. I've heard of it before, but I don't know what it is. Um, what is the American Stamp Act? Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Googles, let's go. What do y'all got to say? American Stamp Act. The act required the colonists to pay tax, represented by a stamp on various forms of papers, documents, and playing cards. Stamp Act 1765. An act for granting and applying certain stamp duties and other duties in the British colonies and plantations in America towards further defraying expenses of defending, protecting, and securing the same, and for amending such parts of the several acts of Parliament relating to the trade and revenues of the said colonies and plantations as direct the manner of determining and recovering the penalties and forfeitures therein mentioned. So the Stamp Act was March 22nd. Oh, that's a very interesting date, 322 number, by the way. We should look at, just by the way, being 322, the number of the Skull and Bone Society, as well the day of Isis, being spring and the mother of labor and fertility. But let's move on from there for a second. Let's get back to, oh, hello. How is it going? I see, what's up, Reggie Wood Wilson, Stevie, CEO Boss, Zoe, Dak Frederick, hello, Johnny Lightfoot, Dr. Robert James Goodman, Marcianne, Marianne Baker, Witch Dragon, Help Us All, Dewana Carl, and Cecilia Grace. Whether you've stopped in for a spell to listen or pass through, welcome and hello. All right, let's see. Even the independent workmen do not always work for public sale. Okay, let's go back here. So, the American Stamp Act. Okay, so the Yorkshire manufacture indeed declined, and its produce did not rise to what it had been in 1755 till 1776 after the repeal of the American Stamp Act. In that and the following year, it greatly exceeded what it had ever been before, and it has continued to advance ever since. The produce of all great manufactures for distant sale must necessarily depend not so much upon the dearness or cheapness of the seasons in the countries where they are carried on, as upon the circumstances which affect the demand in the countries where they are consumed, upon peace or war, upon the prosperity or declension of other rival manufacturers, and upon the good or bad humor of their principal customers. A great part of the extraordinary work, besides which is probably done in cheap years, never enters the public registers of manufacturers. The men servants who leave their masters become independent laborers. I love that whenever he talks about the men servants who leave their masters become independent laborers. It's one of the most, it's just because I can relate to it. Like that's how I feel, right, about quitting my job is, and working for myself, and it's so much better for me, at least. I just like hearing that. But the way that he words it, right, the men servants who leave their masters become independent laborers. The women return to their parents, and wait, for what? The women return to their parents and commonly spin in order to make clothes for themselves and their families. Even the independent workmen do not always work for public sale, but are employed by some of their neighbors in manufactures for family use. The produce of their labor, therefore, frequently makes no figure in those public registers of which the records are sometimes published with so much parade, and from which our merchants and manufacturers would often vainly pretend to announce the prosperity. Okay, you know what? What the hell is going on here? All of a sudden, this young lady who works at the cafe here at Barnes & Noble's just changed the trash out. And all of a sudden, oh, there's crap all over the floor. These little flies, those tiny little flies, those natty little fruit fly things, flying all over the place. I don't like flies. All right. Unless I was Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies, maybe I might like them, but that is not I. All right. Or am I? All right, let's see. Okay, continuing. Even the independent workmen do not always work for public sale, but are employed by some of their neighbors in manufactures for family use. The produce of their labor, therefore, frequently makes no figure in those public registers of which the records are sometimes published with so much parade, and from which our merchants and manufacturers would often vainly pretend to announce the prosperity or declension of the great empires. Though the variations in the price of labor do not always correspond with those in the price of provisions, but are frequently quite opposite. We must not, upon this account, imagine that the price of provisions has no influence upon that labor. The money price of labor is necessarily regulated by two circumstances: the demand for labor and the price of the necessaries and conveniences of life. The demand for labor, according as it happens to be increasing, stationary, or declining, or to increasing, stationary, or declining population, determines the quantity of the necessaries and conveniences of life which must be given to the labor, and the money price of labor is determined by what is requisite for purchasing this quantity. It must be, but hey, in times of inflation, is it? Right? A lot of people are struggling with the fact that that this is not happening. The money price of labor is determined by what is requisite for purchasing this quantity, right, of necessaries and conveniences of life. Though the money price of labor, therefore, is sometimes high, where the price of provisions is low, it would still be higher, the demand continuing the same if the price of provisions was high. It is because the demand for labor increases in years of sudden and extraordinary plenty and diminishes in those of sudden and extraordinary scarcity that the money price of labor sometimes rises in the one and sinks in the other. Right, of course. So if there's abundance, then people should get higher in a country, right? Like the national wealth is higher, then people should be getting paid more, right? It is because the demand for labor increases in years of sudden and extraordinary plenty. So more people are getting hired when, for example, let's take a company by company basis. So if one company has a sudden increase of sudden and extraordinary plenty, right, then they're going to want to hire more people. And if hiring diminishes when a company has sudden and extraordinary scarcity, right, it is because of this that the price of labor, or how much people are getting paid, sometimes rises in the one, right? So people get paid more when there's more hiring going on, and get paid less when there's scarcity. So that would actually more apply to, so people would get, the demand for labor would increase in a company. So one company will be hiring more people when it's doing really well, right? And then instead of hiring more people, though, sometimes, as they will, even the people that they hire will be getting paid more, and the people who are already there might be getting raises. But in scarcity at that, then not only will the people not get raises, their money might stay the same, but even if they hire more people, those people who they hire are going to get paid less. Or the people even that are already there working may not only not get any raises, their hours may be cut so that they're paid less. Okay, continuing. In a year of sudden and extraordinary plenty, there are funds in the hands of many of the employers of industry, sufficient to maintain and employ a greater number of industrious people than had been employed the year before, and this extraordinary number cannot always be had. Those masters, therefore, who want more workmen, bid against one another in order to get them, which sometimes raises both the real and the money price of their labor. Right, of course. If they need more people, they're going to raise the price, competing or bidding for them by offering better benefits and higher wages. The contrary of this happens in a year of sudden and extraordinary scarcity. The funds destined for employing industry are less than they had been the year before. A considerable number of people are thrown out of employment who bid against one another in order to get it, which sometimes lowers both the real and the money price of labor. In 1740, a year of extraordinary scarcity, many people were willing to work for bare subsistence. In the succeeding years of plenty, it was difficult to get laborers and servants. That's so weird. The scarcity of a dear year, by diminishing the demand for labor, tends to lower its price, as the high price of provisions tends to raise it. The plenty of cheap year, on the contrary, by increasing the demand, tends to raise the price of labor, as the cheapness of provisions tends to lower it. In ordinary variations of the price of provisions, those two opposite causes seem to counterbalance one another, which is probably in part the reason why the wages of labor are everywhere so much more steady and permanent than the price of provisions. Increase in the God, yes. This means that people should either stock up more on the things that they need, especially like non-perishable items when those things are less expensive, or if they are buying the same amount as they exactly need, put the rest of that money into savings for when those things become more expensive, as there will always be cycles, as you may have learned along with me when I was reading Babylon's Banksters. All right. The increase in the wages of labor necessarily increases the price of many commodities by increasing that part of it which resolves itself into wages, and so far tends to diminish their consumption both at home and abroad. The same cause, however, which raises the wages of labor, the increase of stock, tends to increase its productive powers and to make a smaller quantity of labor produce a greater quantity of work. The owner of the stock, which employs a number of laborers, necessarily endeavors for his own advantage to make such a proper division and distribution of employment, that they may be enabled to produce the greatest quantity of work possible. For the same reason, he endeavors to supply them with the best machinery which either he or they can think of. What takes place among the laborers in a particular workhouse takes place, for the same reason, among those of a great society. The greater their number, the more they naturally divide themselves into different classes and subdivisions of employment. More heads are occupied in inventing the most proper machinery for executing the work of each, and it is, therefore, more likely to be invented. There are many commodities, therefore, which, in consequence of these improvements, come to be produced by so much labor than before, that the increase of its price is more than compensated by the diminution of its quantity. Okay, so there are many commodities, therefore, which in consequence of these improvements come to be produced by so much less labor than before, that the increase of its price is more than compensated by the diminution of its quantity. All right, well, that's the end of part 2 of what's known as Of the Wages of Labor in the Wealth of Nations, finally. And now I can carry on with the Little Book of Economics and How Money Works, as soon as I can find my bookmark. Where art thou, bookmark? And then continue on it. So that's part 1 of that. And now for the Little Book of Economics is a little bit more interesting than How Money Works, or so far that's how it's been. Found the bookmark. And the next reading I'll do is going to be from the Wealth of Nations is of the Profits of Stock, which is actually much shorter than the previous chapter. But we'll get to that when the time comes, because after this I'm going to get right into Wealth of Nations. So right now, this is the second book reading here, which I would have done in the first reading, but it had so much to cover in Wealth of Nations that I didn't get to it. But here we are now. And one of my favorite subjects, which is taxes. So this part of the Book of Economics is called Make Taxes Fair and Efficient, the Tax Burden, Make taxes fair and efficient. The tax burden. So, what shall we learn here? Well, one of the things I know that I repeat over and over again that a lot of people should learn to take advantage of by as much research as they can is the fact that um, the American tax code is actually written for Americans to legally avoid paying as many taxes as possible by the rule number one of taxes as laid out in the book called Tax-Free Wealth, is that it's your money, not the government's. It's your money, not the government's. And that's rule number one. Rule number one, it's your money, not the government's. So, but let's see what this has to say about that. All right. Make taxes fair and efficient. The tax burden. In context, focus, economic policy. Key thinker, Anne Robert Jacques Turgot, who lived from 1727 to 1781. Before that, in 1689 to 1763, expensive wars, together with an inefficient tax system that exempted landowners and unions, lays the ground for French financial crisis and the Revolution. After that, 1817, in his Principles of Political Economy and Taxation, British economist David Ricardo argues that taxes should fall on luxuries. 1927, British mathematician Frank Ramsey emphasizes the importance of price elasticity. And in 1976, economists Anthony Atkinson and Joseph Stiglitz suggest uniform commodity taxes are optimal in the design of tax structure. Yay, very exciting. Let's get to that. Right. Ooh. Who bears the burden of tax? Well, the key question of tax incidence intrigued the gifted economist Anne Robert Turgot, who was the French Minister of Finance from 1774 to 1776. Another key year that's interesting because that was the year that Wealth of Nations was published. The question is not as simple as who should pay tax, as taxes affect many things from prices and profits to amounts of goods consumed and incomes received. Changes in these can ripple through the economy in surprising ways. The burden of a tax, which is taken to mean a decrease in happiness, welfare, or money, can be shifted from one person or group to another. If you are planning a vacation and a new fuel tax puts the airfare above the level you are prepared to pay, the tax has made you unhappy. The new fuel tax has reduced your welfare, but not necessarily the airline company's profits. Who should pay taxes? Turgot argued that taxes interfere with the free market and should be simplified. Powerful groups should not be exempt from taxation, and the details of its implementation matter. His recommendation was for a single tax on a country's net product, the value of its total goods and services minus depreciation. His thinking was influenced by an early school of economists known as the physiocrats, who believed that only agriculture, land, produces a surplus. Other industries do not produce a surplus and so cannot afford to pay tax. They will always try to pass it on by increasing prices and charges until finally it reaches the landowners. As farmers pay much of their surplus in rent to landowners who produce nothing. As farmers pay much of their surplus in rent to landowners who produce nothing, Turgot argued that the landowners should be taxed on the rent they charged. Later economists refined the principles of fairness and efficiency that go into an optimal tax system. Fairness includes the idea that those most able to pay should pay the most, that similar people should face similar taxes, and that those who benefit from government spending, such of a new bridge, should contribute to it. Efficiency means both effectiveness in collection and maximizing society's welfare while raising the required revenue. Economists argue that efficiency means disturbing the market as little as possible, particularly to avoid blunting incentives for work and investment. There's an incredible flow chart here, which I don't even know where to begin. Should I even begin? Oh, it's going everywhere. All right, so starting with taxes should, and one arrow goes down, be fair, and then that goes to they must fall mainly on those able to pay the most. Taxes should be fair. They should fall equally upon similar people. Taxes should be fair. They must fall on those most likely to benefit. Okay, that makes sense. Good. And taxes should be efficient. They must be collected effectively. Taxes should be efficient. They must maximize welfare while raising sufficient revenue. Taxes should be efficient. They must distort markets as little as possible. Good. And both of those things, taxes should be fair and taxes should be efficient. Make taxes fair and efficient. Okay. That makes sense from what I read. Okay. Continuing. And this is a very short section here, so we're almost done before we go to how money works. Perfect tax design. The last few decades have seen huge strides in the sophistication of tax design, integrating both fairness and efficiency. Perfect markets theory, for example, suggests commodity taxes should be uniform and apply only to final goods for sale to final users. Income taxes should be linked to ability rather than income, and taxes on company profits and income from capital should be minimal. Taxes on company profits and income from capital should be minimal. Taxes on company profits and taxes on company income from capital should be minimal. Right? That I understand. Market failure analysis, on the other hand, suggests that taxes on undesirables, such as pollution, increase people's welfare. Taxes on undesirables, such as pollution, increases people's welfare. Oh yeah, so they tax things that pollute more. In general, tax policies have moved in the directions shown by such theories while paying attention to revenue and political acceptability. All right, and finally there's, to end this section in this book about make taxes fair and efficient, we have a spotlight on Anne Robert Jacques Turgot. Born in Paris, France in 1727, Turgot was destined for the priesthood until an inheritance in 1751 allowed him to pursue a career in administration. By the late 1760s, he had become friendly with the physiocrats and later met Adam Smith. There he goes once again, Adam Smith. From 1761 to 1774, he was the Intendant of Limoges, a regional administrator. On the accession of Louis XVI in 1774, Turgot became Minister of Finance and set about making reforms that encouraged free trade. In 1776, he abolished the guilds and ended a government policy that used unpaid, forced labor to build roads by instituting a road building tax instead. Louis XVI did not approve and dismissed Turgot from office. His reforms, which some felt might have averted the French Revolution of 1789, were overturned. He died aged 54 in 1781. His key works, 1763, Taxation in General, 1766, Reflections on the Production and Distribution of Wealth, and in 1776, the same year that Adam Smith published his book, Wealth of Nations, he published the Six Edicts. All right, that concludes this section of this installment of Wealth Attraction Research, which was the little economic books. And finally, what I think is probably going to be the most boring part of this comes from How Money Works, but who knows? It might be insightful. I got to read it anyway, because this is basically me doing my university course in economics, if you will, and recording it. This is how I think while I'm studying and learning this stuff. So I have to do it, right? I have to do the assignments, right? But so even as boring as it is, I got to put this stuff in my brain somehow. All right, here it goes. This one is from the How Money Works. It is also very short. and it's called financial instruments. A financial instrument is something that has value and can be traded. This might be cash or currency, shares, assets, or debts and loans. Wow, so a financial instrument is cash, shares, assets, debts are financial instruments, and so are loans. It can include evidence of an ownership of interest in a company or other entity. Many records of financial instruments are now held electronically. I wonder why they felt necessary to state that. Black Mirror, anyone? How they work. Financial instruments are legal agreements that require one party to pay or promise to pay money or something else that has value to another person or organization. There are usually conditions attached to an agreement. These conditions cover the amount and timing of payments of interest, cash, capital gains, premiums, or provision of insurance cover as part of the agreement. As proof that you own a financial instrument, you might hold an actual document, such as a share certificate, an insurance, or a contract for a debt or a loan. But shares can also be held in an online account. Why hold financial instruments? Growth and dividends. Investors buy and trade financial instruments in order to receive a straightforward capital gain or to receive interest from a bond or from dividends of shares. Risk control. Buying assets that perform independently of each other, shares from one country and government bonds from another, for example, can help reduce risk in a portfolio. Preparing for the unexpected. An investor wishing to hedge their portfolio might buy insurance against that portfolio failing investment. Holding an insurance certificate gives protection against losses that have been set out and agreed in the policy. 16% is the rise in the value of Google shares in a single day on Friday, July 17th, 2015. Interesting. All right, let's take a look at shares. Companies issue shares to investors in return for money. A legal agreement between a company and a shareholder might include the payment of dividends when and if the company can afford to do so, or perks for as long as the investor holds the shares. Derivatives, options, and futures. The value of derivatives depends on the performance of an underlying asset. They are traded to provide capital growth or to limit risk within a business or portfolio. Professional investors may use them to hedge their portfolios. Bonds and loans. These are IOUs between a company and an investor. The investor effectively loans a company or government money, and in return, you can lend money to the government? I'm going to find out how to do that. These are IOUs bonds and loans. These are IOUs between a company and an investor. The investor effectively loans a company or government money, and in return, the borrower pays interest to the investor over a set period at a set rate with a specified date for the return of the capital. You can lend money to the government? See, I just learned something new to think about. Currency. Different currencies can be held and traded by investors to exploit movements in exchange rates for profit. Exploit movements in exchange rates for profit. Investors, different currencies can be held and traded by investors to exploit movements in exchange rates for profit. Insurance. An insurance policy involves a company or individual paying a premium to an insurance company, entering into a contract that promises monetary compensation in the event of them suffering a pre-agreed loss scenario. And finally, funds. An investment fund, such as an ETF fund, is a supply of capital belonging to, by the way, an ETF is an exchange trade something. Is that fund? Is that word fund by F? Because why would they use it? I hate when people do that. Right? When you use the word, that a letter at the end, as opposed to what? See, this is bothering me now. What is an ETF? Come on. What is it? Exchange traded funds. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. So an ETF. So it's not a such as, why would you say an investment fund such as an ETF fund? No, just say an exchange traded fund. That's what I thought. You don't say an ETF fund. You just say an exchange traded fund. I don't know. That always bothered me. I'm bothered. All right, it's a good thing we're almost done, because now I'm bothered about this whole thing, right? What are some other examples of that, right? I know that there are a whole bunch of people do all the time, and I'm not thinking of any right now. But I'll come on later and rant and tirade about that when I figure it out. It'll be like a whole entire talk. An investment fund, such as an exchange traded fund, is a supply of capital belonging to. I'm gonna scribble it out in the fucking book right there. It shouldn't even be the other word fund. Gosh, one more time. An investment fund, such as an exchange traded fund. You see, I'm so bothered by this, because here's how it would read. If I were to read it the way that it says here, if I'm reading out the initial, what the abbreviation ETF stands for, right? It would say an investment fund, such as an exchange traded fund, right? Why? An investment fund, such as an exchange traded fund, is a supply of capital belonging to a group of investors. This money is invested by the fund in the hope that the fund's share price will increase, netting the investors a capital gain. It may also pay interest. And finally, need to know. Capital gain, profit from the sale of assets such as shares. By the way, it can also be from real estate. Risk, the chance that an investment's return may be lower or different than expected. And portfolio, a range of investments held either by an individual or by an organization. Do any of you have portfolios? All right, I do. Okay. Oh, that's it. Son of a gun. And now I'm going to take another break and then come back with something that's really exciting to me, which is Babylon's Banksters. I'm continuing with part 3 of the book. And that should be fun. So let's see, it's 1,800 hours and 22 minutes here on the East Coast of the United States of America at 6:22 in the evening, Eastern Standard Time, Eastern Daylight Time. And that means I have a few more hours, 2 hours and 28 minutes to be exact, before I'll be leaving this Barnes & Noble's. Probably I'll leave before that, maybe, if I feel like it. Before I go and explore Richmond, Virginia a little bit more, because I love this place. I may be moving here from Virginia Beach, we'll see. All right, so let's see. So, what's been happening here? Oh, I know. You've been listening to Wealth Attraction Research, WAR, War, Wages of Labor 2, Part 2, presented by Hakeem Alibokis Alexander on Spreaker Social Podcasting and Wisdom Social Audio Inc., presented for World Reading Club in association with UniquilibriuM.